It was a busy weekend in Zimbabwean politics, with the President Emmerson Mnangagwa vowing to revive the country's economy as he launched his second bid for a second five-year term. Yesterday, he told a large crowd of supporters near the capital of Harare that ZANU-PF will do what it can to remain in power. Zimbabwe will hold presidential and parliamentary elections on the 23rd of August. Mnangagwa is up against 10 other candidates, with opposition leader Nelson Chamisa his strongest challenger. Let's get into that, because the leader of Citizens Coalition for Change in Zimbabwe, Nelson Chamisa, is appealing for free and fair elections. He's on a campaign trail and was in South Africa this weekend ahead of the polls in August. He's called on Zimbabweans in the diaspora to come home and vote. We take a look at his visit to South Africa over the weekend with commentator Professor Ibbo Mandaza for some analysis on this. Thank you very much, Prof, for your time this afternoon. What to make of Nelson Chamisa's visit to South Africa this weekend, calling on Zimbabweans in the diaspora to come home and vote? Was it a successful move?
Well, I was astounded at the response they received from Zimbabweans in South Africa. I think it was a novel move, in my view. Was generally, we tend to forget at home that we have so many of our people outside there. And the nearest, of course, being South Africa, where we have maybe 3 to 4 million Zimbabweans. But of course, unfortunately, as you are aware, the diaspora they're not allowed to vote. There is no diaspora vote in Zimbabwe, unfortunately, especially when we give such big numbers outside. And more importantly, given that the diaspora accounts for almost $5 billion US dollars per annum in remittances to the country. Perhaps it's further evidence that the ruling party, the Zimbabwean state, is aware that most people will have left the country because of the economic and political hardships at home. And that therefore most of them would support the opposition. And I think that explains why the ruling party has been very averse to the idea of the diaspora getting a vote.
Speaking in Harare, the president of the country said that ZANU-PF will do what it can to remain in power. What do you read into those words, if anything?
Well, it's the voice of an incumbent, and maybe it's just a question of language. I'm sure I didn't mean that they will rig the election. It's likely to be interpreted as such, that they will do anything possible in their power to ensure that they stay in power. And I'm not surprised that they will try that. When it's clear that the elections have been disputed since 2000, every election since 2000 has been disputed.
You mentioned I beg your pardon.
It's unlikely that this forthcoming election will not be a case of history repeating itself. We'll see. We don't know yet, but.
You mentioned that you were taken aback by the reception that Nelson Chamisa received when he went to Germiston in Johannesburg over the weekend. And so how would you characterize the politics of the Citizens Coalition for Change?
Well, I think clearly Chamisa is the populist. He commands, by no doubt, is an enormous power, mass base. And I don't know why one should be surprised that I was astounded only because I had not seen before such a kind of reception for a Zimbabwean politician in outside the borders as I did over the weekend. But that's further evidence of the popularity of the man, which is no doubt at all. And I think that he'd easily win the election. And indeed, I would say that he probably won the last election too. but for what we think were irregularities, in terms of the powers that be.
Speaking of his reception, let's just take a look at this particular video that he posted online as he was driving into the stadium in Germiston with hundreds of supporters that were thronging his car. And at some point you can see his security detail sort of pushing people away. This is not something that is unique to him. We've seen it from other leaders on this here continent, where you have people who are desperate for change, but it would appear that some of the leaders are also a tad bit removed from the needs of those people, with some people suggesting that perhaps he should have gotten out of the car and embraced these people instead of having security to push them off. Is that a reasonable argument, or are there genuine safety concerns here?
I think there are genuine safety concerns, especially outside the country, especially in South Africa, where the state agency is a lot of people there. Someone told me there are up to 3,000 to 4,000 such people, and I think justifiably the security details would have taken extra precautions. I've seen Chamisa at footage of his rallies at home. He does actually come out of the vehicle, he greets people. So I think this was extraordinary sort of circumstances which required a high level of security. So I'm not surprised by that at all.
During Thabo Mbeki's era, South Africa's position was quiet diplomacy. Over the weekend, we heard the Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, speaking about Nelson Chamisa and how he is the preferred candidate in terms of the presidential election for the people of Zimbabwe, and not necessarily Mr. Mnangagwa. Is it clear to you what the policy position on Zimbabwe is of the South African government?
I was very astounded and not shocked by the statement by Mbalula. It exhibited a high level of ignorance about the reality of politics in Zimbabwe and in the region. And secondly, it was almost cynical to suggest that thousands and thousands who thronged in Germiston and elsewhere, not to mention Zimbabwe, for Chamisa, as some kind of stooges, who are merely agencies, or an agency for what he called the Western powers. And in fact, he implied that Chamisa is a Western puppet, market puppet. That's incredible kind of language. And on the other hand, in sharp contrast to Chamisa's own statements, which he says he thanked the government and people of South Africa for the reception he received. Clear implication to me that his visit to South Africa would have been cleared by the authorities. So Marula's outburst is shocking in my view, cynical, and it shows a high level of confusion in the South African state with respect to Zimbabwe. Not surprising at all, but it's a story for another day. We don't want to get into that.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Prof, for your time this afternoon.